Here.
Vogel?
Here.
Stearns?
Here. Thank you, Andy. You were one step ahead of me. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
And to the republic
for which it stands.
One nation.
Under God. Indivisible.
With
liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Katie, do we have any public comments on the agenda tonight?
Your Honor, I did not receive any public comment prior to the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Andy, could you give us a COVID-19 disaster update, please?
Yeah, this is just our bi-weekly reminder that the city continues to operate under a declaration of disaster emergency declared last spring until further action by council to rescind said declaration. Just as indicated today in the Meadville Tribune, I believe, or recently, I don't know if it was today or not, it was where progress is being made by the Meadville Medical Center, who continued to conduct vaccination clinics. They'll be doing that for the next couple of weeks through the end of the month at Active Aging on Park Avenue, and then also I believe they're making plans to move to St. Mary's Church on Water Street. So encourage everyone to follow those details. They continue to work down the State Department of Health sort of vaccination priority plan in terms of distribution of those vaccines. And so we encourage people to discuss that with their primary care physician, and the Meadville Medical Center has information on their website as well to sign up to be notified when you reach priority. So at this point, city staff, only police and firemen have been offered, and we will wait our turn when we get further down the plan for municipal employees. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I did receive a shot. Just to let everybody know, I'm as normal as I could ever be, I guess. Other than a little bit of soreness in the arm. It was pretty easy to go through. I want to give Meadville Medical Center a thumbs up for the process that they had. A number of school bus drivers went through it, and it was very well organized, and I was glad to see that the vaccines are getting used. So just my quick comment. Notice of executive sessions, Katie?
Your Honor, an executive session was held on January 6, 2021 to discuss real estate.
Thank you. Motion to approve the minutes, please.
I motion.
Second, please.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any questions, discussion? Roll call.
Donahue?
Aye.
McKnight?
Aye.
Roa?
Aye.
Vogel?
Aye.
Stearns?
Aye. Katie, do we have any communication that we need to address?
Your Honor, I did not receive any communication.
Okay, thank you. Andy, we're just going to jump right to the manager's report. So I'll let you take off with it.
You're muted, Andy.
Okay.
You're still
sorry,
muted.
Your
There
Honor.
you go.
Yeah. So unfortunately, my dashboard changes when I stop sharing stuff. So anyhow, I'll share a few items ahead of Gary Johnson's presentation on the draft zoning ordinance update. In terms of my list, which I have since misplaced, give me 1 second. There's too much on my desk here. Council will recall the Pennsylvania Economy League. You requested additional information from the league in terms of sort of comparable benchmarks with other communities or class cities. We've communicated that interest and need to them, and they hope by next week to have some information back to us to react to. Katie, wearing her deputy city clerk hat, has begun to distribute the statement of financial interest. This is an annual report that all public servants, certain employees, even volunteers in our municipal authorities have to fill out in terms of compliance with the Ethics Act. And so, council, those have been distributed to your mailboxes, and those are due back by May 5th, May 31st. Katie, do you know the date off the top?
May 1st.
May 1st, thank you. So that's you'll see those in the boxes, and so will volunteers for various authorities, boards, and commissions. Marianne Manano, Director of Community Development, and I met this afternoon with Vanessa Rakovich. Vanessa is the new, council recalled at last meeting, you presented a resolution recognizing Bill Thomas for his service to the Housing Authority. Vanessa started on January 4th as the new Executive Director of the Meadville Housing Authority. She comes to Meadville by way of, almost 30 years experience in Franklin, PA, as the Executive Director of their Housing Authority. And Marianne met with her today. Really looking forward to building that relationship. She hopes to present to City Council at some point in the future in terms of make an introduction and just sort of share some of the sort of an overview of the authority and what they're working on in their projects and number of units, et cetera. So we really talked about our desire to strengthen that relationship with the Housing Authority. Just in terms of sort of looking at some year-end revenue figures, these aren't final, right? These aren't final or audited.
Andy, can you hear us?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Can't hear him.
I can hear him fine.
Yeah, I've heard you fine, Andy.
Okay.
I can hear fine.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure what's up, Jim. So just looking at, so we've been reporting monthly in terms of revenue figures. So the earned income tax, these are year-to-date figures, not necessarily against budget. So earned income down at the end, earned income tax collection at the end of December, year-end was down $34,000 from the year prior. Local services tax was down $22,308 from the year prior. And then real estate tax was actually up in the end over the year prior by $27,000. So overall, not too bad. And obviously, expense-wise, we're still tabulating expenses through the end of the year. That's still coming in January through the end of the year, so we don't have final expense numbers for the year. But revenue-wise, that's sort of where we stand. And then was notified today that just in terms of public events, as we talked about the spring, one of our very first public events.
Yeah, you're sounding dead. Can't hear a thing.
The Judas Jake 5K, and then also the St. Patrick's Day Parade. The Judas Jake 5K informed me today that they are planning a virtual event this spring and won't have an outdoor 5K. And we've just begun conversation with respect to the St. Patrick's Day Parade. So, Your Honor, that's really all I have.
Can't hear a thing. I can see everybody.
Okay. I see Jim's tried to call me. All right. Hold on. I'll try to bring him on speakerphone.
Are you people talking? I can't hear a thing.
Yeah.
Someone muted your WebEx?
So yeah, I mean, everyone can hear but you, Jim. So I don't know. I've got you on speakerphone on my phone now.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have this sort of double reverberation thing going on at this point, though. I think.
I understand.
So I don't know how to fix that at this point.
Like I said, it just went dead.
Okay.
Okay, so meeting. Okay.
Andy, it appears that you are muted from my computer.
Yeah, otherwise I've got double reverberation going on with Jim on the phone and then his voice coming back in a delayed manner. We'll see how this goes. Gary, I'm going to tee up your presentation, just your introduction in terms of the draft zoning ordinance.
All right, can everybody hear me? Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So as Andy gets that presentation up on his screen, I just want to preface it by saying this is really just like a 30,000 foot overview of the ordinance. So once we get it, we can dig into it a little bit more in future sessions and with questions from council. But this is really just a kind of how'd we get here, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, Andy, I think you're on the second slide there, third slide. Okay, we can go to the next one. There you go. So 1994 was the last time the zoning ordinance had a major revision. And over the last probably 7 or 8 years, the Planning Commission had been working on sections of it to update it as it could, basically at a staff and commission level without going to the expense of a consultant. The My Meadville grassroots planning effort, of course, was undertaken a few years back. And that had won the 2018 statewide planning award, which prompted the state to reach out to the city to say, hey, why don't you look for some state money? We're willing to work with you on this to try to incorporate some of the My Meadville recommendations into the city's comp plan and the city zoning ordinance. And so we did do that with county help. We did obtain a $25,000 grant with a $10,000 city match. And along with in-kind help from the college and the county, we've been working on that for the last 2 years or so with the consultant, environmental planning and design out of Pittsburgh. We can go to the next slide. So in January, earlier this month, and of course, the Planning Commission voted to recommend to send the draft to council for consideration. So taking a step back real quick, what is zoning? Just from an overall standpoint, zoning is, of course, division of a community into zones with very specific rules in place for use in both regulations. And it can regulate under the municipality's planning code, which governs zoning in Pennsylvania. It can govern land use setback, height, parking, density, et cetera, et cetera. You can see on the slide a wide range of land use and development topics. But in doing so under the MPC, it is required that any regulation relates back to promoting public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. So from a general standpoint, that's essentially what zoning is. We can go to the next slide. So in reviewing the ordinance, when you review it, you'll see several items that are really specific to zoning. You're not necessarily going to see some of these terms in regular life. And I wanted to go over a few of those. So when you're looking at the zoning ordinance and reviewing it, you'll have some understanding of some of these specific terms. So permitted use by right essentially it's fairly obvious. I think it's permitted under approval by the zoning officer, who makes sure that it complies with all of the applicable standards, such as setbacks and lot coverage, parking, signage, etc. You'll see in there also special exception, which is actually just a use that's permitted subject to a hearing before the zoning hearing board. And that is usually accompanied by several standards that the applicant needs to show the zoning hearing board satisfaction that they would meet. So it is a use that's permitted subject to conditions and then a hearing before the board, just in case there are any special circumstances with each particular project that the board may want to take into consideration in approving it. The next one there, you'll see conditional use. It's essentially the same process, except it goes before council instead of the zoning hearing board. As an additional step of conditional use, it requires going to the Planning Commission as well for review and comment. Okay. A variance is exactly what it says there. It's an applicant requesting relief from the ordinance, so they wouldn't essentially have to meet all the standards of an ordinance in a specific case. In order to receive that from the zoning hearing board, they'd need to show a specific hardship that has to do with the property, not necessarily an economic hardship where it may cost them extra money, but essentially saying, hey, I can't meet this specific standard and this is why. For example, you'll see that lots of times if you have, like, for example, a narrow lot, a difficulty in meeting maybe a side setback requirement for a building. You'll see that sometimes there. The next dot there, you'll see form-based zoning. It's a type of zoning. It's a newer. It's not the traditional type of zoning, which is focused more on structures, how things appear, how buildings appear on the parcel, appear from the street, as opposed to strictly use standards, where you have divisions of use such as commercial, residential, industrial being segregated to their own areas. The next one, you'll see street typology, and that is essentially a street classification based on its purpose and traffic level. So, for example, you have Park Avenue, which is a higher traffic level. It's used more for going through town. And then you'll have, for example, a lower typology might be Pine Street, where people typically would use that more to access their homes rather than trying to get through town. You'll see several different street typologies in the zoning ordinance, and that's really what they're talking about when you talk about street typology.
Gary,
next one. Yes,
excuse me, Gary. The street typology, does that also include parking?
You mean on-street parking?
Yeah, or someone that may be, for example, on Park Ave somewhere, have property and they pull in their yard and they're told they're not allowed to. Is that come under street typology, or where does that fit in?
Now, off-street parking really would be governed more by, somewhat with street typology. That's more in the actual parking section of the ordinance.
Okay.
It does have its own section. But street typology also talks about access to a property. So in what you're talking about there may come under that in as much as you maybe have a corner parcel, and the street typology that would require that the access to the property and the parking would be off of essentially the side street and not off the busier street. So it does apply in that case, in that way, but mainly as far as where you're parking on a parcel has to do with the parking section of the ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The last bullet you'll see there is building typology, and this is really where you get into form-based zoning, where it talks about what a building actually looks like from a bulk standpoint, how many stories it has, what kind of siding it might have, and what kind of architectural features might be included on that. And this form-based zoning gets into that, regulating what a building essentially looks like, as opposed to strictly its use or its placement area on the lot. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, so as I talked about, going to the form-based zoning, most of our zoning right now is really more traditional zoning where you have segregation of uses. And going to the form-based zoning, the reason for that is many of the recommendations in my Meadville found essentially that people like the feel and look of their neighborhoods. And using a form-based zoning may help to do that better than the traditional type of zoning. So we can preserve the look. The idea with the form-based, one of the thrusts of this was to try to preserve what Meadville looks like. And so some of those standards relating to building typology, as I indicated earlier, a single-family dwelling, essentially what the intent is try to make the new single-family dwellings look like the single-family dwellings that are there. And for example, the buildings downtown in the central business district, new ones would look like the buildings that are already there, and it preserves those feels, if you will. The next bullet there, I talked about this briefly. The standards regulate building access. So if you're on a corner street or corner lot with the building has to face the busier street, essentially, to try to, again, preserve that feel and that fabric of the neighborhood. And then access to that would be restricted more to the side street for access to that to keep from a traffic safety standpoint. And also from from a street typology standpoint, the regulations for setbacks are based on the building setbacks in the neighborhood and the type of street it sits on. So essentially what this new ordinance would do, it isn't necessarily going to say you have to be this far from a property line, but what it will say is you need to average the area, the setbacks of existing buildings on that block, and you need to be very close to what those setbacks are to try to keep that building wall feel in place, to try to then, again, preserve that feel of that neighborhood. And the last bullet there is really another. Is there a question?
So if someone wanted to build, and I use the example of an Elizabethan half timber home, which is a gorgeous home, it wouldn't be permitted because it has stucco, which is the definition of Elizabethan half timber. Wanted to build a stone 1.5 story, it would not be permitted because it's not a 2-story. And if someone wanted to duplicate Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water, you'd lose on 3 areas because it's made of concrete and stone and has a flat roof and it doesn't have 2 stories. It's a multi-story. Even though they would all be improvements to the community, build the tax base, and be a credit to their neighborhoods. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Okay. Yeah, there's potential for that for sure under the proposed ordinance, and with some of the concerns there for sure. So that's something definitely the council could take a look at as far as maybe broadening some of the standards that maybe would apply. So moving on to the last one of the other major changes is to basically open up a little bit what the uses would be in certain areas of the town, in some of the older areas surrounding downtown and the downtown area. And so in some of those neighborhoods would allow essentially neighborhood scale businesses such as laundries, small grocery stores, community centers, drug stores, little coffee shops, things like that, without major negative impacts. And hopefully that would help to maybe spur some adaptive reuse of some of the larger buildings we have in town that people have trouble heating or maintaining, essentially as single family or even duplexes. So it opens up some neighborhood scale shops such as the ones you may have seen 50 and 60 years ago, maybe not quite that long ago, some of the corner stores that we may have had in town. This would open it up to allow some of those in some of the older residential districts to try again to lean toward preserving some neighborhood fabric or promoting some more neighborhood interaction. Is there any other questions specifically on that slide there? There's a lot of information there. Okay, we can go to the next slide then. So under the structure of the ordinance, this is right out of the table of contents. I think most of them are fairly straightforward, but the ones that have the asterisk there, 2 through 5, are really the ones that contain the bulk of the newer regulations, the form-based regulations, if you will. So those are the ones that would appear to be new. If you were at all familiar with the older zoning ordinance, those sections there are really the ones that you would concentrate on to try to understand where we're going with that. You can go to the next slide. So a zoning ordinance adoption, this is going to be considered essentially a new ordinance. So we follow the new zoning ordinance adoption process in the MPC. So council will take as much time as it needs to discuss the ordinance, make amendments as necessary, so the council is comfortable with what the ordinance says. Public hearing, a specific public hearing dedicated to hearing public comment on the ordinance is required before voting, and at least 45 days before that, it has to go to county planning for comment. Now, the county has been involved all the way through the process, so they're fairly familiar with the ordinance itself, but that still would be required to obtain their comments on it if they had any. If at the hearing substantive issues are brought up and major changes are made to the ordinance, to the draft ordinance, another hearing must be held. And the last comment there is just enactment must take place within 90 days after the last public hearing, whenever that may occur. So that's just the process moving forward, looking forward, how that might play out. Next slide, please.
That brings up another question.
Yes, sir.
All right. I've noticed that there are some neighborhoods that have been totally changed as to zoning. The real question is, have the residents of those neighborhoods been contacted in bulk and asked what their opinion is? For example,
they have not,
are from R1 to mixed use.
Correct. They have not thus far in the process. When it's when it's a comprehensive remapping, which this probably would be considered based on the changes, some actual map changes, boundary changes, as well as zoning district changes. Specific mailings to specific neighborhoods are not required in the MPC, and that's one of the things we're going to want to discuss moving forward to talk about how council might want to get the word out. I'm not sure if we would do a mailing to every property, or if we'd want to do that, but there has not been specific outreach to neighborhoods talking about the map change thus far.
I guess I have a question about that because we talk about community buy-in, and I understand you can't publish a 165-page draft ordinance, nor would most people read it. But it would be helpful if someone knows that what had been an R1 neighborhood is now going to be mixed use, the benefits and the possible consequences.
I agree.
Do you want us to schedule presentations, some staff presentations to discuss those major changes at a future council meeting then?
That might be helpful.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that, right? I think that the actual implications on people's lives and neighborhoods, right? So I as a resident might not know what it means to live in an R1 or an R2 zone, right? But so to speak people's language and tell them what this means to live in this kind of neighborhood, and how that would change, should this kind of should the ordinance as proposed pass. Yeah, I think a presentation like that at council sounds great.
To be honest, I think it should even go further than that. I mean, I can remember growing up and changes being made in our neighborhood that we weren't aware of until they were actually started. And a lot of them were not good. I mean, I think it's up to us to let people know and even get their input, make them feel a part of the decision, not instead of, oh, we made this decision, this is what we're going to do in your neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, right, the Planning Commission has been working on this for about 2 years. I mean, there is an opportunity there, right? There's been other stakeholders involved in terms of helping to craft the draft. We can talk about then how we want to and do further engagement in terms of other public meetings or other presentations to cover major proposed changes.
Absolutely.
I think that would be wise. It fosters the community buy-in. After all, these are the people who are buying the properties, maintaining them, and paying taxes on them. I think they might want to have some input into how their neighborhood character could change.
Yeah, I think the point is that it won't change, and that's why we're proposing the type of zoning that we are. But I want to underscore the fact too, right, that this whole process, that this whole opportunity and the zoning ordinance as it's drafted is built on a several year community listening process that engaged thousands of people across town. And so certainly it would be true to the spirit of that to bring it back to people in kind of this iterative opportunity to continue to engage folks. But I guess I just want to, yes, to Andy's point, this has been developed in a series of public meetings over the course of 2+ years, which I've gotten to attend, and it's been great to see this unfold. But it's also building right off of a community engagement process. So true to that spirit to bring it back to people, but it's coming out of that as well, which I think is important to note.
Gary, it's Leroy. I got a question. When we talk about this and we talk about the public hearing, how difficult would it be to scan this and have it available on our website that individuals can go to it, look at it, write down their questions, so when there is a public meeting, they're prepared for it and they have an opportunity to look at it? it can't be that difficult to put it on the website, is it?
No, I don't think so. I'm assuming the website has the capacity to hold it. I think it's a 9 meg file. But yeah, absolutely. We could do that.
That would give the community that would give the community an opportunity to go to the website, look at it, and question. I mean, they'd have a complete view of what we're looking at changing.
But along with that, Leroy, it would be helpful to have the existing zoning ordinance. If you just see something that says MU1 and you don't know what your current zoning is, that's of little help. If you know what the current zoning is versus the proposed zoning, that would engender some thought and discussion. So I would suggest that the maps be put up side by side so you can see that something was formerly called D1, now it's MU1. Something that was formerly called R1, which had some R2 in it, and is now MU1.
I agree.
So people could see there are going to be changes.
Sure. Gary, is there volunteer staff that to make that happen? So it doesn't take up our staff?
No, we'll do it at a staff level. There's no.
Okay.
I also might ask you, right, if we can have this presentation at a council meeting, right, that kind of succinctly in plain language tells us how this will change certain neighborhoods or you know, keep certain neighborhoods intact, right, what the actual implication is for people and where they live or where they work, where their business is. If maybe that presentation that again is succinct and in plain language, either in video form or just the slide deck could accompany that, because some of this is, I mean, it's not impossible, but it's still a thick document, almost 200 pages to get through, some of which is gibberish if you don't understand planning lingo. So, but having something, some version of the presentation that I hope we can get in the next few meetings, having some version of that available to accompany the drafted ordinance, I think would be helpful.
Yes.
So is that a request for staff to create a presentation? Is that what I'm hearing that would accompany the ordinance?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. I think we'll have to discuss what our scope of work is with the contractor, because we'll have to look at the resources we have to pull this off.
Understand.
All right. I think the next slide is probably not going to be very applicable at this point. So it's really going to be based more on how council wants to move forward with public involvement, maybe specific meetings or specific hearings to gather public involvement. This timeline here was just kind of put together as a kind of an idea. Not sure that we're going to meet that. So I guess we'll just see how it goes with involvement, with the presentation, with getting things on the website, seeing what kind of public involvement and concerns we might receive in the meantime, and we could go from there. Couple more quick slides, if you want to go to the next one. As I mentioned at the beginning, this whole process would involve both a zoning ordinance update as well as incorporation of recommendations and action items from the Meadville effort into the city's 2013 comprehensive plan update, which was the last time the city's comprehensive plan was updated. There were several of those that were recommended to be included in the city's comp plan update, and that can be done by resolution at any time. It doesn't involve all the ordinance update or the ordinance language and hearings, but this kind of goes hand in hand with the zoning update. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is the list, and you can review this at your leisure, but these are the Meadville initiatives that were recommended to be incorporated into the city comp plan, which is a separate advisory document from the zoning ordinance, which is a regulatory document. But you'll see several of these items in here relate specifically to city government action, and others may refer more to actions by volunteers or subcommittees. You'll see, of course, one of those is the second bullet there: change the zoning ordinance that prevents urban agriculture. that of course would be included in the zoning ordinance update to allow urban agriculture. So some of these items here are now being dealt with or have been dealt with, but these are initiatives from my Meadville that are recommended to be included in the comp plan update. But again, this of course is up to council to refine that list if they feel it necessary. And that's all I had for today. Any other questions?
Anybody have any questions for Gary?
Gary, since they're asking about it, this is Sean. Is there any specific like neighborhoods you can tell me where it's changed from one to a different? I'm looking at the map. You know where it's gone from.
As Councilman Rowe indicated, Fifth Ward is proposed to be a major change. There are other areas around State Street. What I'm talking about, it has both to do with actual map lines, as well as changes to the zoning designation itself. There's several areas in town. They focus mainly in the central area, not much in the R1. I think there's Fifth Ward, and then there's one section over on the east side that changed from R1 single family residential to another zoning district. But the bulk of the R1 on the north and the south ends of town would stay the same. Really have pretty much no change at all. But mainly the areas we're talking about with changes are in the central area of the city as well as Fifth Ward.
Okay.
Really have to kind of.
What's the dots? And I see the green area is an economic development corridor, and then there's a line and there's white dots on it. What are the dots?
I believe the dots. I don't have that map in front of me, unfortunately. I believe the dot is actually the airport hazard overlay.
Okay.
That's related to Port Meadville Airport, and it's part of the transition zone where planes actually come down. It limits the heights of structures and trees in that area.
Like I was wondering, like Peter's Heat Treat building's sitting empty down there right now. Now, how would this change what they could do with that? What would it make it so it could be done different now?
I'm going to have to look at the ordinance and see. I don't have it in front of me.
That's fine. Just something that I was thinking about that one. I'm trying to think of buildings that I know that are sitting empty that would fall in that category where you could do something different with it.
Yeah, I'll check on that and let council know on that one. I can't recall if that zoning changes or not.
Okay. Thanks, Gary.
Yep. Any other questions?
Gary, do you see this proposed zoning ordinance as requiring fewer, the same, or more special hearings or special exceptions and variances and so forth?
I guess I'll preface my answer by saying I really don't know, and I can't forecast that, but based on if we had the same types of that's a tough question.
Okay, like given the ones that you brought to council over the last few months, would we decrease those specific ones, or would they stay the same, or would we have even more of them? Like the one on Park Avenue. In fact, there were two on Park Avenue. One, the deal fell through.
The first one would have been I believe the first one wasn't related to use. It was related to setbacks. The first one may not have had to go to variance on Park Ave. I believe the one next to Byam Insurance is what you're talking about.
I think it was next to Byam or the church, one of the two, yeah.
Yeah. I think that one might have gone through without a variance requirement because it was related to setbacks. The other one I believe is would still be a special exception. The daycare one that I think you're referring to. That one would still go to special exception as it's currently written, I believe. But as far as the other ones, I can't, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. I don't want to lie.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. So council's going to have the opportunity to go through this, write down our questions, or bring them to you. If we'd have any recommendations and things, correct?
Absolutely, anytime.
So just a real quick question. I've always been interested in this, and we talked about this for a few years about opening up like a bakery shop in a residential area, or a pizza shop like we used to have, or ice cream shop. There's going to be, it could be a part of this thing, correct?
Absolutely.
All right, good. Okay. Any other questions for Gary? Gary, thanks for working on it. But oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
It is not a question. I guess I just want to underscore from like observing the 2+ years that this has been in development, that to me, it seems like it's a lot more, it's reactive. So it's taking into account the neighborhoods as they exist now, the structures as they stand, and it's really relying more on the relationships of properties to one another, to the street, to the neighborhood, right? Rather than, focusing on one individual property and what they can and cannot do. It's about the relationship of those properties to each other, the kind of neighborhood feel. And it's about what's there now and preserving what we can. And within that allows for a lot more, like some of the things that you were mentioning, Leroy, opportunities for different kinds of uses in spaces, so long as they kind of maintain the neighborhood. So it's just I appreciate. I know it's been a lot of work that Gary and has put in, as well as county staff too, and the consultants. So I think that this is really exciting, and I'm glad that we're at this point. So thanks so much for your work.
So council, this is Andy. Our goal was really just to orient you to the document, how we got here, the history of the process, sort of what happens next. In response to this conversation, we'll have an internal discussion on sort of next steps on how we best or better break it down and present it to council, how we might consider other public outreach, how we might present the information on the website to sort of do a side-by-side comparison of zoning districts, for instance, from existing to proposed, or maybe some sort of GIS overlay map. So we'll have some further dialogue internally on next steps.
Thank you.
That sounds good.
Okay, thanks, Gary, everybody, for working on that. Andy, anything else under your manager's report?
No. Jim, like I mentioned, you couldn't hear me earlier. I can follow up with you. There wasn't anything of major consequence. I can follow up on the information that you didn't hear prior.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So we'll jump to the old business. Council members' priority for 2021. I want to thank staff for putting together a survey that was sent out to council members. We received some of that information back. It's really interesting. And so I'm not sure who wants to handle that. I know, Katie, you did the survey, or Andy, somebody wanted to pick up from there?
Yeah, I will. So I'm bringing it up. So just for the benefit of sort of the public, right, that it was at our last meeting that we discussed, council members presented each a number of priorities. We had some discussion about those last meeting. And so simply what we did is we created a list that we sent out to council, asked you, each gave you 5 equal votes, right? These weren't ranked. We didn't say give us your top priority. We just said place 5 ticks in a box. And so what you see here in this summary is just sort of the results of that, just to help guide your discussion. So in terms of the sort of the top vote getting priorities are listed above, you'll see that little bar graph chart that The very top one, reviewing the moving of 911 dispatch from our own local dispatch to county dispatch, received 5 quote votes of council. Reviewed the marketing of 984 Water Street, the former city building, presumably leasing or sale. Begin discussion of the home rule charter process. Implement third-party billing in the fire department, received 3 votes. Focus attention on a county-wide reassessment, received 3 votes. Focusing on the overall strategic management planning program report and its recommendations, received 2 votes. Reviewing mutual aid for emergency services, also 2 votes. And then you'll see 1 each for planning around Heidi Cooper Park, focus on the zoning ordinances we've just discussed, and investigating the taxability of games of skill, which as explained, we've got that on our books, and we're going to begin to move forward with that, I think. But and then down the chart below is just by each council member is how the priorities, again, in no particular order or rank, just sort of what each of you had indicated in your responses. So it's just a guide for discussion. That's all this is.
Okay.
I think it's a pretty good guide, Leroy.
Yeah, I was really kind of surprised on the bar graphic that we got with the 911 dispatch and of course the 984 Water Street. Though I have to say, after we just had that conversation about our ordinance, that I'm glad that's moving fast. It's moving faster than what I thought it was. So we can juggle more than one project, I'm sure. Try anyway. Anyone else have any comments on it?
So I guess the question, right, does this sort of reflect, the question that I guess I have is, does this sort of, as you've, does this reflect then sort of the relative importance to council, some of the issues we've talked about? Is this an adequate reflection, the sort of voting exercise that you did prior to the meeting? Does this sort of help? Does this capture what we think are the general priorities of council? And if so, then we'll kind of use this as our guide in prioritizing our time and attention.
I vote yes.
Yeah, I would kind of think that anything that receives 3 or more votes, right, are obviously things that are of a high priority to most council members, right? And those are the things that perhaps can receive the more time and attention. I will bring up a few other things. First, I think it might behoove us to block off some time in our June or July council meetings to kind of review where we're at, right? If staff is on the ball, as they often are, we might have made a lot of headway on some of these and might be able then to kind of to move forward on some other priorities, or maybe there's still more work to do, and then we'll know that. So I guess I just want to kind of put that out there for consideration. And then I guess the last thing I'll bring up too, and this is just a thought I had now, right after this kind of conversation around the zoning ordinance. I have been working. I believe the council knows this because we approved it in the budget for 2021. But I've been working with Andy and Gary on an application for an AmeriCorps Vista who would be a full-time employee, not an employee, but they'd be employed full-time and would work on a specific project. And it looks like there's potential for that to be, for their focus to be on the research and kind of coordination, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Andy and Gary, around the home rule charter process. So researching what that timeline might look like, talking to maybe other communities that have done that, and bringing that information back to council. And I'm just thinking in terms of a kind of timeline, right? That position, should we be approved, they would start in July, and that I know that things might change after tonight, but that's kind of around the time that the zoning ordinance would wrap up, right? So we might be able to kind of flop those two things. I know I voted for home rule charter over the zoning ordinance, but I would be okay with maybe switching those two things so that the zoning ordinance gets the attention it needs at the beginning half of the year, and we've got someone who's got their time and attention dedicated to home rule charter process at the end of the year. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Actually,
so,
I would say
again,
that three of the top 5 ought to be done by then. 911,
Right.
984 water, and third-party billing. I think those could be handled by on or before July, which would free up some time if we wanted to do the zoning. And yes, I voted for zoning, but home rule charter is going to be a little more involved, and assessment is also going to be more involved. So I would expect them to take longer.
I agree with you, Jim. I imagine we can kind of knock a few of these out early on.
I like the idea of the first 3 or the first 2. Get moving on them as quick as possible with the Water Street, and of course 911 to do the research and get it finished up. But those have a direct effect on the 2022 budget. So I like what we got. I think Autumn's right, and Jim, that we can probably knock a couple of these out and then refocus.
Right.
So, I have no problem going with this chart.
Okay, so are we talking all of the things on this chart? Are we thinking we set we look at the ones that have 3 or more votes? Leroy, I heard you mention the first 2.
Well, the reason I'm saying that, Autumn, because of the one, it was the first pick and the second pick of the majority of council. Now, the 3 votes, you've got 3 different things: the home rule, and then you have the third part billing, and then the county reassessment. The home rule and the reassessment is certainly not going to probably take place in 2021. Hopefully maybe by the end of 2022 or 3. So I would like to focus on the first top 3. I have a very strong interest in the 911 and the 941 water or 984 water and the third part billing, because that could affect our budgeting quickly.
Correct.
Or at least we know where we're heading. So we have to make decisions for next year.
I think the very bottom one about games of skill, that should not be too time consuming, I wouldn't think. I mean, again, just to squeeze it in, I'm not advocating for a particular cause, but that could be easy.
Well, I think Andy already mentioned that. If we got
something knocked out.
Sorry, I didn't mean to walk over you, Jim.
No, I just said the investigation of games of chance taxability should not be a very time-consuming assignment. So I would see that as something that could be squeezed in somewhere else. I'm not saying it should be a top priority, but I'm saying it's low-hanging fruit. It shouldn't take a whole lot of research to determine a course of action on that.
All right.
Again, finding staff time to do it is the issue. But I think that the top 5, because they represent a majority of council.
Mm-hmm. And then we can always revisit this. I mean, this is not road and gold where, it's going to take an army to move it. Because after hearing the zoning ordinance tonight, if we can get that wrapped up and have the ability to market different areas of the community, to bring businesses in and maybe start smaller ones or help the current ones. So I say knock out as many as we can and then revisit this, and then we can move it around, if we all choose to.
Andy, do you have a sense of direction from what we've talked about?
Yeah, I think there's enough here to guide our focus and priorities. And like I said, we'll be revisiting these regularly throughout the year. So I think this is fine.
Any other questions for Andy on this? Or any other comments?
I just will
Okay.
echo your thanks to staff for preparing it. So thanks, Katie and Andy. This is helpful for us to look at and discuss.
Andy, any other comments you want to make?
Nope.
Okay, we'll move on to authority, boards, and commission. I don't think we have anything, do we, Katie?
No, Your Honor, I do not have any action for council tonight on that.
We'll just simply say, council, that your last meeting you had established subcommittees, those to meet with interested candidates who had applied by the December deadline. Those meetings in many cases are underway, so I would imagine in the next few weeks you'll have some recommendations coming from those for appointments.
Okay, sounds great. Under new business discussion, redevelopment authority's request to establish a land bank and blighted property review committee.
Yeah, so council, in your packet, there are two separate memos. The redevelopment authority has been obviously meeting regularly each month and has been reviewing a number of tools and researching and meeting with some stakeholders on sort of opportunities to better address blighted properties in the city. And there's sort of two different sort of recommendations for action coming from the redevelopment authority. And there were two memos in your packet from Dennis Frampton, chairman. One is for the city to consider establishment of a land bank and to also then appoint the redevelopment authority's board of directors as the managing entity and board of the land bank. And then separately to establish a blighted property review committee, which is another tool. And Mary Ann is on the line. I think our goal is to really just sort of review what each of those are quickly, what her memos that you had received sort of describe those in some detail. But I guess the goal would be just to give a quick overview, see if there's then general interest from council to continue to pursue those resources for blight mitigation. So Mary Ann, do you want to tackle, which one do you want to tackle first, the land bank?
Yes.
Go for it.
Okay. So in 2012, the PA Act 153 established that municipalities with 10,000 or more of a population could create their own land bank. So the city of Meadville would obviously fall into this. The goal of a land bank is to really eliminate any harm caused by these vacant, abandoned, or tax delinquent properties, eliminate any barriers in returning these properties to productive use, conveying these properties to new owners, and hold properties for future use. Now, the redevelopment authority already does this in a sense, but we asked that Scott Henry, who is now the former director of Erie City Redevelopment Authority, come down and to discuss his experience with a land bank. And really two key benefits came out of this discussion. One is that in cooperation with the county, a land bank could acquire properties prior to a formal judicial sale. So the property would have already gone through the judicial process to eliminate any kind of past liens or mortgages. But the land bank would have kind of first shot at acquiring the properties and wouldn't have to go to a formal auction or try to outbid a second buyer. The second benefit would be that, again, in cooperation with the county, the school district, and the city, once a land banked property is sold back to an individual, the land bank has the ability to recoup 50% of the aggregated tax revenue on that property for up to 5 years. So that means that this could help fund more property acquisition by the redevelopment authority, and ultimately the redevelopment authority has been tasked with looking at affordable housing. So this could play a role in that as well. And I should mention that in 2018, an amendment was made to the PA Act 153 of 2012, which allowed municipalities to bestow land banking powers on the already sitting redevelopment authority board. And in speaking with Scott Henry, Erie City had their land bank prior to this amendment. But he said if they could do it again, that he would advocate that Erie bestow those powers on the redevelopment authority. Having a second board to kind of try to oversee was a lot of just headaches and made things a lot more difficult than it needed to be.
If there were interest of if there was interest of council to move forward, right, to establish, and we would then begin to work on sort of the ordinance and whatever, but there would also be additional outreach and groundwork and discussions with both the county commissioners and the school board with respect to their, as Mary Ann talked, because there's an opportunity for them to participate in terms of providing future tax revenue from those land bank properties to support the work of the land bank. And so there's obviously more outreach that needs to be done on that front. But I guess essentially we're looking for council's blessing to begin to move forward in this manner.
I'm fine with
where
that.
the funding is going to come from.
Well, there's no new resources, right? So Jim's question is, where's the funding for the land bank come from? Well, so it's probably right from the blight remediation fund that council established. It could be CDBG funds that acquire still the same resources that we have now, but having the land bank, as Mary Ann explained, provides us a little, in terms of the judicial process and the judicial sale and the tax claim process, gives us a little stronger seat at the table. Doesn't bring us any more fiscal resources, unless over time, as we've described, that you might use future tax revenue from the resale or redevelopment of those properties to fund future land bank activities.
I'm casting unawares on this, but would you estimate that there are probably around 200 properties in Meadville that would qualify under this? Am I low or about right or high?
Well, I don't know, Mary Ann, do you have an answer to that question? From our blight survey that we had done a year ago.
Mm-hmm. There's between the U.S. Census data and the 2019 County Housing Plan, there's an estimated 15% of the household units within the city were considered to be vacant. So you're probably on track with that number, Jim.
All right. That helps.
Yeah, I'll just point out that a land bank was a recommendation, if I'm recalling correctly, from the strategic management planning program, and also one coming out of the county's housing study. So I think it's I'm glad to see movement, and I'm certainly in favor.
Yeah, I'm in favor of it as well. I'd like to see Council Andy and Mary Ann and them move forward with it.
Sounds good. Sean, any comments?
No, just go ahead and give it a try. I'm just concerned that there isn't a whole lot of funding that we can use on this. But I'm sure they'll figure something out. The people on the redevelopment are pretty sharp. And the other thing I'm concerned is they're competing with capitalist, you know, people that are going to buy those properties as an investment, and the city's using their money to compete with them. And that's something that I've always thought isn't a fair playing field, but I'd like to see the redevelopment have this tool, because there's things that need to be done that aren't being done. So.
I mean, that's a good point.
Like you got the,
yeah.
I think it would be productive to move forward and get more information. I think we'd be doing a disservice if we don't.
Exactly,
but of
Jim.
course, I'm concerned about the issue of funding, that with the few funds out there, you're going to be limited to maybe a half dozen properties a year, especially if you're going to rehab them.
I think it's less than that.
Yeah, it gives us no further resources. It just gives us a stronger seat at the table in the process, right? So to Sean's point about potentially competing with the private sector, we really don't have money to compete with the private sector. We would be dealing with the worst of the worst, or you'd have an opportunity like where a fishbowl property on North Main Street, where someone bought it for pennies on the dollar at a judicial sale, has done nothing, has reinvested nothing, not even sure they've even continued to market it. It's those types of situations where we would have had the opportunity to step in at times and to prevent something like that from happening. Or properties that we've known have a long history where we happen to know the structural integrity is questionable of a property, and yet it goes to the judicial sale, and someone from out of town buys it for pennies on the dollar, and then we're still struggling with the same enforcement issues that we've had for years.
And I'll just speak to Andy's comment there. Just at this past judicial sale, that exact situation that he described happened at judicial sale, where the redevelopment authority was actually outbid because the properties, we knew the value, and whereas the redevelopment is only going to bid so high. And then they were outbid, and now the city is dealing with, again, property maintenance issues, boardings, citations on the properties.
And that buyer now wants to sell it to the redevelopment authority.
That's happening more than
there
once.
is, and that's a good point. Now, there is a potential remedy for both of these problems, the blighted property and the establishment of the land bank. And again, I hesitate to say it without seeking the advice of legal counsel, but if the city were to pass an ordinance requiring that every structure be insured by a reputable insurance company with a rating of best A or A minus, the fact is that most insurance companies will not insure dilapidated buildings. So faced with an ordinance saying you have to insure, and having a dilapidated building that the insurance company won't insure, either the property gets put on the market, sold as is, or the people are forced to improve the property and bring it up to building code standards. I remember from my days in real estate that a home that was rewired with 100 amp electric, and it was good modern wiring, but it was more than 20 years old. The insurance company wanted a certification or more rewiring, and it was a nice home. So if they do that for a nice home, what are they going to do for a dilapidated property, residential, commercial, or otherwise? So it's kind of a backdoor way of solving your problem.
Yeah, I was worried that would have some negative ramifications there, Jim. But I also wonder, why would we do that and not a land bank? I'm
not saying you don't do a land bank. I'm saying that gives you more power if you do a land bank.
Gotcha.
I mean, the idea is to have properties that are well maintained and are marketable and are safe to live in. And so if you give some more teeth to it, then the position of a land bank is even stronger.
I understand now. Thank you.
So the sounds of it, Andy, you can go ahead and continue to move forward on it.
All right, thanks. We'll begin to lay additional groundwork and bring it back to council in terms of next steps.
Okay, thank you. Discussion, City of Meadville participation in the second phase of the climate action. Andy, are you taking that one?
I'll do initial. Yeah, so there's one more. There's just one more topic. The Blighted Property Review Committee was a separate memo from the Redevelopment Authority and a separate tool. So I'll have Mary Ann address that one next.
Yep.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, all right. So Section 1712.1 of the Pennsylvania Urban Redevelopment Act allows for the creation of a Blighted Property Review Committee. So this is a cohort of the Redevelopment Authority, City Council, the City Planning Commission, to designate properties as blighted. So this is a tool that would allow the Redevelopment Authority to condemn a property as blighted and issue a notice of taking of that property. So there are 11 different criteria to be considered blighted under the state statute. A property has to fall only under one of these criteria. It's important to note that the property must be vacant. It cannot be a currently occupied property to be condemned. So the real benefit of this one is that for the properties that don't fall under conservatorship actions, or we can't negotiate with the current owner, this committee can condemn the property, and then we can go through, the Redevelopment Authority can go through the process of condemning and taking the property. A lot of local municipalities already have this. Erie does, Warren. Erie actually just used their committee last month to condemn a blighted property in the city. So this could be a really important tool for non-compliant, non-responsive landowners who have let their properties really go.
So who would be on that committee? Could you give me an example?
So typically how it's structured is that there would be someone from the City Planning Commission. So theoretically the chair of the City Planning Commission, the Redevelopment Authority board member, the mayor is typically on it, and then the second member from council is typically on that.
Is there a requirement of an attorney to be on that, or would that fall under the Redevelopment Authority?
So that would ultimately be a Redevelopment Authority action. The committee certifies it as blighted and gives that recommendation to the Redevelopment Authority. Then the Redevelopment Authority and their attorney would go through the legal process of actually condemning.
Okay.
I like it. I think we need. I think it would help. I think it would help get some of these houses back up, and it gives redevelopment another tool to work with in conjunction with the land bank. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, on that note, Mary Ann, I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to how these two things would work in concert. So say that things move forward, council approves, and we do have a land bank and a blighted property review committee. Can you talk about how they would work in collaboration, or like what that would mean?
Sure. So let's say there's an area of the city that's of focus, and that redevelopment authority decides to go through with a affordable housing project. The land bank could be used to acquire properties out of judicial sale that were in that area. And if they stumble upon an owner who is out of town, let's say, non-responsive, won't work with a third-party straw buyer, something of that nature, and the property falls into one of these criteria, and it's vacant, the Blighted Property Review Committee could step in at that point and help acquire that property to fulfill the affordable housing area need.
Good.
Right, so it's kind of like part of maybe like a suite of tools that we could use to kind of target specific areas for redevelopment and investment.
That's correct.
Well, thanks so much. Yeah, this sounds great to me as well.
Sean, you okay with it?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Jim, you okay? We lost Jim.
So I think that's fine, Leroy. We'll, Your Honor, we'll take the next steps in preparing both to bring back to council and have further dialogue with Redevelopment Authority and begin to lay out next steps.
I'm just curious while we're talking about this, what time frame are we looking at? I mean, is this something to be done in a short period of time, or is this Mary Ann is going to be drawn out for a couple months, or can you give me a heads up on it?
I mean, these are both enacted by ordinance. So we would do the draft ordinance for review, and then it would just go through the typical reading processes. So within a few months, I'd say, unless Andy has some different thoughts.
No, I think that's adequate, right? I mean, it's obviously in the pace of everything else we're talking about, but those are things that Mary Ann can sort of begin to work on independently to move forward.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Andy or Mary Ann?
No, thanks, Mary Ann.
Now we'll go forward. I'm sorry about that. The discussion is City of Meadville participation in the second phase of climate action. Andy?
Yeah, I'll turn this over to Autumn here in a second. So just by way of reference, right, last summer, I don't know, last summer, wasn't it? I believe that, or late last summer, Councilwoman Vogel had come to council with, obviously there's been some citizen interest and student interest in working on a greenhouse gas inventory, which was really the first phase, and then the second phase of a program through DEP, Department of Environmental Protection Program, that provides support to municipalities and communities working through these. And so I guess the opportunity now is to work on to participate in the second phase, which will be development of a climate change action plan. So Autumn, do you want to sort of pick it up from there?
Sure. I don't need to go into too much detail tonight, but I guess I will just kind of set the stage. I mean, as Andy mentioned, right, we had discussed this. Entering the cohort for the first half of the program was the commitment we made in the fall to do the greenhouse gas inventory. That work has been done, and a draft report will be ready for council, hopefully for our next meeting. And there's so Meadville, we're part of the cohort. There's no needed action on our part to recommit or discuss again. But I had made the ask of you all, the ask had been presented just for that first half of the year. And so we're, so as promised, kind of bringing that back so that we can kind of see what's been done and then recommit or not, but hopefully recommit for the rest of the year for this kind of spring semester and this climate action plan creation. Again, I guess just to let folks know of what's gone on so far, basically the work of the fall was to gather data on greenhouse gas emissions throughout the city of Meadville. And we were in contact with utility providers and service providers for that. And all of this work has been done for the most part. I've taken the lead as given the charge by council when we discussed this in the summer. I've taken the lead on being kind of the city's representative. So I've been spending Friday afternoons in this training, learning something I don't quite understand, but and making these asks for data and getting those again to the student George Ackerman and the professor Matt Bethurham who've been working on this, as well as the committee that's supporting them. So kind of building on that, right? And I guess I say this to kind of stress the notable lack of resources we've used in terms of staff time, especially, and I think we continue in that vein. So looking ahead at the spring cohort, there's interest on the Planning Commission's part to participate in that cohort as the kind of representation from the city of Meadville. And so, like the memos we saw tonight from the Redevelopment Authority, I believe that there's a memo that's kind of underway that summarizes a motion that was approved at the last Planning Commission meeting for the Planning Commission, some members of the Planning Commission to participate in this cohort on behalf of the city. So, just kind of priming all of us for maybe more of a lengthy conversation, hopefully not too lengthy, maybe I'll just say it's okay, but at least a conversation next time around that memo and the Planning Commission's request to participate. And again, that would be an action plan for how we kind of reduce and mitigate, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and then mitigate maybe some of those effects and plan for kind of the environmental future for Meadville. So that's I guess I'll take questions now if folks have them, but it's more of just kind of a teaser, right, for something that'll be on our agenda for next time, coming again from the Planning Commission.
So my understanding, Autumn, is that this will not involve any of our staff time or financial resources. Is that a correct statement?
You know, it's hard to make promises like that, Jim. But what I can say is that in the fall, I think I might have asked Debbie Oldakowski and Andy for a contact to pursue some data. It was, Andy, maybe you can speak to this. I hope I made it as minimal in terms of demand on city staff as possible. And that is, again, that's the intent for this to come from Planning Commission. We've got folks on Planning Commission now, in particular Guy McCumber, who's so much more knowledgeable on this stuff than I am, and will be super valuable, but is willing to give up his time so that, right, the kind of onus is on staff. Certainly, right, if it's something, the report in its final product will have to, or the plan rather in its final product will have to go in front of Planning Commission and go in front of council for review and approval. And right with that, there comes some staff time. I am that's part of preparing for these meetings that we have.
But we're not looking at staff time for research and that sort of thing. It would be strictly run copies of a plan.
Run copies, yes, sure, yeah. It was minimal, for sure, along those lines.
All right.
Unless they want to be involved, or we want them involved. There's certainly room for that. Other communities are doing that, but I recognize, right, that that's not necessarily a position we're in. So we're trying to alleviate that. But if we want staff involved, or if staff want to be involved, there's certainly room for that. But trying to not ask that of our staff.
Well,
So
I'm
in
glad
summary,
you're taking the time with the.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so in summary, right, we'll have what is going to come for the next meeting will be a request essentially from the Planning Commission to represent the city in the cohort, and there will be some sort of the preliminary findings or a summary of the greenhouse gas inventory from the fall from the first cohort will be presented as well.
And we'll have some documentation to go with that.
It'll be the memo from the Planning Commission, and it'll be some data from the greenhouse gas inventory. And then the goal would then be to proceed with the second cohort to work towards developing a climate change action plan with actionable strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and go from there.
Okay. That's right. And I will, I would hope that in that report out on the results from the greenhouse gas inventory, I would hope that we could invite the folks who have been working with that data, as they can speak to it far better than I could, but that time can be limited. It can be capped, capped at 10 minutes or less, just so that we have a sense of the work that's coming out of it and can ask those questions if we'd like.
Any other questions for Autumn on this? Autumn, thanks for working on that along with your volunteers. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Autumn.
Good job, Autumn.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, I need a motion to exonerate the city treasurer for collection of unpaid 2020 per capita tax. Could I have a motion, please?
A motion.
I will so move.
A second?
Second.
Okay. Discussion pretty much explains what we're doing, but Andy, do you want to?
Yeah, Katie, would you just, for the public, would you read the memo from Michelle Sampson, please, Treasurer Michelle Sampson?
I am Michelle Sampson, City Treasurer, being duly sworn according to law, say that the annex paper is a record of taxes which remain unpaid on the city per capita tax duplicates for the year of 2020, and that I have made a diligent effort to collect such taxes. The 2020 per capita taxes that remain unpaid have been turned over to Sharp Collection Agency, Sharpsville, Pennsylvania, for collection on or about January 11th, 2021.
Any discussion?
Your Honor, we had distributed just to council the list of delinquent per capitas there. By my estimation, there's 1,817 delinquent accounts, with totaling at face value, $18,170 is what the face value of the delinquent accounts would have been. Those will be turned over to Sharp's Collection, our third-party collection agency. And as council has noted in the past, right, so for what is initially a $10 per capita fee tax paid to the city, due to the city, adds up pretty quickly in terms of other costs imposed by Sharp Collections that probably could total about $80 when it's all said and done for someone who's delinquent.
This is only the cities, or is it the city and the county?
I believe this is only the city portion.
So if the county and the school district do the same thing, for the lack of $20 or $25 a payment, these people are going to be paying about $250 because they didn't pay their taxes on time. I remember, I think I mentioned this at a July or August meeting, that the taxes were coming out because we usually put them in with property taxes if the people are property tax payers. And I think we even advise them to be aware of that so they don't just say, oh, the bank takes care of my property tax and forget about it.
Right.
But
so you'll recall, council, that the collection of the per capita tax was sort of a recommendation in the strategic management plan to talk about future collection and how that's done. We can revisit that recommendation at a future date.
okay.
Any other questions? Roll call, Katie.
Donahue,
Aye.
McKnight,
Aye.
Roa,
Aye.
Vogel, Stearns.
Aye. I need a motion to exonerate the city treasurer for the collection of unpaid 2020 real estate tax.
So be it.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Discussion. Katie, do
Are we
we
going to
have
have Katie
a...
read it? Leroy, we're going to have Katie read it?
Yeah, that's what I was just asking Katie, if there was a memo from Michelle on this.
There is, Your Honor.
Okay.
I am Michelle Sampson, City Treasurer, being duly sworn according to law, say that the annex paper is a record of taxes which remain unpaid on the real estate tax duplicates for the year of 2020, and that I have made a diligent effort to collect such taxes. The 2020 real estate taxes that remain unpaid have been returned to the County Treasurer's Office at the Crawford County Courthouse for collection on January 7th, 2021.
Okay, thank you. Andy, any comments?
I'll just note, I don't have the number of delinquent accounts here, but the face value of delinquencies totals about $211,000. So that's roughly a 7% delinquency rate of the overall taxable real estate tax billing.
Yeah, I think last year was 255,000, so it looks like it went down a little bit, if my memory is correct.
Yeah, I don't have that in front of me, Jim, unfortunately.
Any other discussion? Roll call.
Donahue,
Aye.
McKnight,
Aye.
Roa,
Aye.
Vogel,
Aye.
Stearns.
Aye. Katie, we have a resolution, if you would read, recognizing Robert Byers.
A resolution of the Council of the City of Meadville recognizing firefighter Robert Byers upon his retirement. Resolved by the Council of the City of Meadville that whereas Robert Byers has served as a valued employee of the City of Meadville, I'll have to fix that number. And whereas Mr. Byers began working for the City of Meadville Fire Department on June 22nd, 1997, and whereas Mr. Byers was promoted to lieutenant and began serving in that capacity on January 28, 2004, and whereas Mr. Byers was promoted to captain and began serving in that capacity on July 21st, 2014, and whereas Mr. Byers chose to return to a firefighter EMT position on January 20th, 2015, and served in that capacity for the remainder of his career. And whereas Mr. Byers has performed the duties of his office with dedication, thoughtfulness, and professionalism, and whereas Mr. Byers is elected to retire from active employment with the City of Meadville effective January 3rd, 2021. Now therefore be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Meadville that City of Meadville firefighter Robert Byers is hereby commended for his many years of dedicated service to this community and its citizens. Be it further resolved by the City Council of the City of Meadville that the best wishes of the city are extended to Robert Byers for every success in the future.
Motion, please.
Motion to adopt.
Second.
I'll second.
We'd like to thank Bob for his dedication to the city as a fireman, and we wish him the best retirement, and just enjoy it.
Long, happy, and healthy.
Roll call.
Donahue,
Aye.
McKnight,
Aye.
Roa,
Aye.
Vogel,
Aye.
Stearns.
Aye. Mike Crawley, I see you're online. Do you have any questions for us?
Can you hear me, Mayor Stearns?
Yes, I can. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just looking back at something Andy said at the beginning of the meeting and was hoping to have a chance to go over the revenue figures that he gave out. And that could be, a few minutes from now after the meeting's over, if it's okay with him.
That's fine, Mike. I will have an executive session with council. Do you want me to just contact you afterwards?
That'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
You're welcome, Mike. Council member statements. Larry, I'll start with you this evening.
Your Honor, do you want to repeat? Who did you start with?
Start with Larry.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Katie and everyone that's done work on the different projects that we went over tonight, and just tell everybody remain safe, and don't forget COVID's still very much around, and wear your mask.
Thanks, Larry. Jim.
People retire from boards, commissions, and authorities. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank them for their service. Also like to thank those who are currently serving and those who have agreed to serve. It strengthens the community when we have people who are interested in helping out and making our community stronger and more cohesive. The second thing, I was walking my dog at 4 a.m. and the streets department, actually Public Works, was out in force plowing snow. They'd probably been out for a few hours. So thanks to them for a great job. And the third thing, when we have snow like this, if you have fire hydrants in your neighborhood fairly close, how about brushing the snow off and maybe shoveling a 2 or 3 feet swath around them so that if there were a fire, you don't have a frozen hydrant to deal with and snow to shovel, because the extra couple minutes that takes is the difference between whether someone could live or die. Our fire chief might have a different recommendation. I'm saying like 3 feet around the hydrants. It doesn't take very long. You can do it with your foot. So that's all, Your Honor.
Well, thank you, Jim. Sean?
I'd just like to say I'm really encouraged with council's eagerness to find new ways to create some income, and I think it's very interesting. I'm hoping this can all work out. I really don't like doing this from home. I'm hoping that someday soon we can all get together again like it's supposed to be, and we can see the public. I'm a Browns fan, and I know Larry is too. And Larry will probably attest to me that the playoff game in Pittsburgh was really the Super Bowl for a Browns fan, and everything else over that was just gravy on top of it.
That's right.
To be in the game against Kansas City was probably enough. But next year we'll be back, and hopefully everything will work out again. And I'm trying to get to a Meadville basketball game. I don't know if they're ever going to have it open to the public. I've heard that you can't get in, so it's strictly family on some night or something. But we'll see. And I'm encouraged. They won a couple games, and who knows? Still a lot of fun. That's all, Leroy.
Okay, thanks. Autumn?
Yeah, thanks. Today we had a few interviews for open positions on the Market Authority, and I posed what might have been a pretty unfair question, but it's also a tip for those of you going through Market Authority interviews. But I asked folks, right, in 2026, at the end of their term, what would they hope to see? What did they hope that the market house looks like? What was going on there? And it doesn't quite feel fair to ask that of others without answering myself, and it also got me thinking about my own answer. And it's January is inauguration day, so that was a time for reflection, I guess. But so in 2024, Larry and I will be finishing out our term here, and I guess I'll just share that I envision a Meadville that's vibrant and downtown is full of life, where people feel safe and secure in their homes. And lots of folks from all across our community have a seat at the various tables where decisions are made and ideas are turned to plans, turned to actions.
All right.
I think that involving people in this way is really our only way forward. Just like Jim said, if we want a vibrant and equitable future for our community. I watched the inauguration today, and in Amanda Gorman's poem, The Hill We Climb, she closed by saying, "The dawn blooms as we free it, for there's always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." And I think that kind of resonates with that Meadville starts with me line that we throw around a lot. And I think it just speaks to the light that we need to see in our city right now and the light we all need to be. Tonight we saw how a community planning process can inform our city's zoning ordinance. Likewise, we're engaged in interview processes right now for 5 positions on 3 city boards and authorities. In 2024, I envision a Meadville that's full of light, where the brilliant and creative people living here are actively involved in making life better for those who call Meadville home. So thanks everyone for having part of that. And I think it's our role to make sure that folks have that opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Autumn. I'll end it by, I'm not sure if many of you were able to watch the live streaming of the Martin Luther King program and celebration. It was a fantastic job done. I want to thank Reverend Marcus McDaniels for putting that together. If you didn't see it, his daughter has one heck of a good voice. And then also the speaker, Rice King, I apologize, I don't have her first name here, was an excellent speaker. So I want to thank them for putting it together and doing it live. It worked very well, a lot of good information. Larry, congratulations on the article on the front page of the paper with your father's history. You'd be proud. So with that, I will ask for an adjournment to an executive session for Andy.
Your Honor, to confer with legal counsel on a contract or an agreement.
Okay. Motion, please, to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Roll call.
Donahue,
Aye.
McKnight, McKnight,
I think Larry's muted.
Roa,
Aye.
Vogel,
Aye.
Stearns.
Aye. Okay, Andy, let us know when you're clear.